What did the weird kid at your school do to earn that reputation? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Had a German foreign exchange student that dressed like Willy Wonka and carried around pies. For a while, I thought the only English he knew was, "Do you like pie?" He was weird as, but always smiling, and the pies were good. Story 2. He baked a cake for the class. It was nobody's birthday or anything. The weird kid just baked a cake and brought it in. The teacher confiscated the cake and brought it to the teacher's lounge instead of throwing it away. Another teacher had a slice, and it had the kid's pubic hair baked into the cake. Never saw that kid again. Story 3. We had a kid who would march up and down the halls yelling military marching cadences. He would have his iPod in, and apparently all that was on there were marching cadences. He also never talked to anyone. Every day, all day, before class, marching. Going from class to class, marching. After school to the bus, marching. All while yelling those cadences, not saying, singing them, yelling. We were all convinced he was going to shoot up the school. Story 4. I was friends with the kid in grade school, Joe. Joe was losing his baby teeth. He had a crush on this one girl, Carla. He ran up to her in the playground to show her how loose his front teeth were. She called him gross, so he punched himself in the mouth and knocked out 2 of his baby teeth. He then chased Carla with his teeth clamped in his tiny bloody fist, screaming, "How do you like me now?" He was my hero. He was sent home. The next day, he came back to school with the 2 teeth in a tiny box. He was later sent home for shooting the teeth through a straw at things during class. He would retrieve the teeth, rinse, repeat. What a menace. He is now a MD, happily married but not to Carla. Story 5. He was into anime when that was very much seen as for losers. He always wore a Sailor Moon shirt. During a middle school dance, the last song of the night was My Heart Will Go On, which I guess was his favorite song, and he started slow dancing with his arms around an imaginary partner. I hope he's had a good life. Story 6. It was high school. He was a nerd but not a fun one. He wrote a movie and was carrying the script around the school to show to teachers. He wrote his own autobiography where he wrote in third person and called himself an artist. His mother was choosing who can come to his birthday, and it was high school, so parties meant beer, booze, and second base. Nobody came to his birthday. He is successful, awarded historical book writer. Story 7. Ours was a kid who liked to take his shirt off and shotgun, punching a hole in the can and chugging it. Sodas on our school bus like he was at a frat party. Years later, I took a job as a cook in a cafeteria. My manager said he hoped I stayed longer than the last guy who liked celebrating the weekend by slamming back sodas after poking a hole in them with a kitchen knife. Incredulously, I asked the guy's name. Yep, it was the Pepsi party animal himself. Some people never change. Story 8. She had neurodivergence issues. A bunch of other girls had a bulletin board outside the classroom where they always hung out and posted notes and crude drawings, making fun of how other people, including her, dressed and acted. Like Facebook bullying, but before social media was invented. The school turned a blind eye to this, until one day she took a lighter and set the board on fire. Then the school suddenly cared a lot and she was expelled. Story 9. Not my school, but the school I currently work in. She eats cocktail shrimp the way you peel string cheese. I don't understand how she does it. The first time it happened, we all stood there in silence. She's done this at multiple potlucks for the club I oversee. Edit. It's a potluck. She brings the shrimp herself. She's a freshman. Story 10. Fucked a dog at a birthday party. A party the birthday boy's mother made him invite this kid to. A party the mom would regret that decision greatly. A party that ended before pizza arrived, before cake, and before we got to use the bomb-ass slip and slide that my friend's dad made for the party out of big-ass tarps and sprinklers. That was 30 years ago, and I cannot unhear that mom's scream. Story 11. I attended a special education school that welcomed kids with various challenges, from mild dyslexia to severe mental illness. Overall, it was a positive experience. Small classes, attentive teachers, and just regular kids being kids despite our different needs. But there was one classmate I'll never forget. He appeared in our grade suddenly one day and immediately stood out with his unique behavior. Some of his memorable antics included sitting completely upside down in his chair during class, which the teacher oddly never addressed, creating an elaborate artwork using correction fluid, Tipp-Ex, on the principal's window, in full view of the entire school during recess. He only stayed at our school briefly. Years later, I was surprised to spot him on television. He was getting a haircut and having a rather strange conversation with the barber. Looking back, I wonder what became of him. Story 12. My elementary school offered Bosco sticks for lunch sometimes. If you don't know what those are, it's a cheap and highly processed breadstick filled with mozzarella cheese. This cheese was very stringy. You could probably get a few feet of stretch if you really tried. One day, the weird kid pulled out the mozzarella, swallowed it nearly whole. He hung on to the end and pulled it back out. I couldn't finish my lunch. I was so grossed out. Story 13. She used to have longish hair. One day she decided to get a pixie cut. Nothing too unusual so far. What made it strange, however, was that before cutting her hair, she had braided it into a thick, neat braid and brought it to school. That day, she tucked the braid under her beanie and went around to every teacher and acquaintance, asking them to pull her hair. Those who complied were met with a surprising twist. They'd end up holding the braid in their hand, while she burst out laughing, cracking up as loudly as possible. Story 14. Ooh, I got a doozy. So, lots of the weird kids over the years, but I sat next to a kid in computer science in like 10th grade who was congenial enough, but his story's plot just thickened and thickened and thickened over the years. He was a stocky redhead kid with long hair that made me think of a lion's mane. He was usually pretty reserved, but easy to irritate, and on the one or two occasions he got made fun of enough to explode, he started screaming about his condition, called blood vision, where he loses all control and tears apart everyone around him. When people would laugh at him, he'd storm out saying it was for everyone's protection. I kind of felt bad for the guy. I was a semi-popular dude and tried to extend a helping hand by asking him questions about things he was into and about his condition. He said it was a congenital defect that plagued him all his life and that it was passed down from his mom, but that it helped him with his duties as a werewolf hunter. I dialed back on the questions and kept an arm's length, but I really was careful about not pissing the dude off because this was post-Columbine and he had that 1,000-yard stare. Anyway, after that semester, I didn't see much of him. We'd nod politely in the hallway, but I ended up in a class with his goth sister and, wouldn't you know it, she was a vampire hunter. I didn't get close with her, but I remember overhearing her go into great detail about her sacred duties and how she was the only one keeping everyone safe. Then, one day, I'm doing the office assistant extracurricular thing, and the office has glass walls all around, and commotion starts outside. People are gathering around and I can't see who's in the middle, so I go to see if I can scope it out, but the AP told me to sit still and lock the door from the inside. I eventually see that the dude was getting wailed on by some other kid, and the sister was on the side yelling with her eyes closed, presumably casting spells. Security there, kids hauled off to their respective offices, calamity dies down, and then, not, their dad shows up for him in a wizard cloak and weird hat. He had a shortish gray beard and walked with a weird gaunt. I only saw him for a second from my AP's office, but I wasn't the only one, and we all talked about it for weeks. I don't remember if that's the last time I saw him or her, but shortly after they were both gone from the school. I always felt bad wondering how awful their childhoods and subsequent lives must have turned out being raised by that probable lunatic. Story 15. 14-year-old kid put alligator clips on the end of 2 wires, attached them to his shirt, then jammed both wires into an electrical outlet during science class. I'll never forget time slowing down during that moment. I saw 2 sparks slowly travel up the wire over the course of about 5 seconds. I remember the panic on his face as the sparks were approaching, the panic on the teacher's face when he saw it. The sparks hit the kid and all the lights went out in the building momentarily. The lights flickered a few times and the kid dropped to the floor. The kid managed to rip the clips off of himself and out of the sockets. He then stood up and looked at the teacher terrified, mainly because he thought he was gonna on in trouble. The kid went to hospital and was absolutely fine. But yeah, mad lad. Story 16. Kid was just a conceited little asshole, but also weird. I used to think people used to just pick on him for being nerdy, but all that he got, he brought on himself. Like if someone gave the wrong answer to a question in class, he'd call them stupid out loud and like that. He was very disrespectful, and when someone didn't put up with his, he would go running to the principal and claim he was being bullied, when in reality it was just people not taking his. This was in high school too, BTW. Story 17. So I went to a very, very, very fancy elite prep school, like top 10 in the country, multiple presidents attended, etc. New England, yada yada. When I went there, they were going through a bit of a we are the cool school stage and had eliminated the dress code. No more coat and tie, you could basically wear anything. Sweats even. This change had happened about 8 years earlier, so nobody currently enrolled had attended when there was a dress code. First day of 9th grade, a new kid shows up in a coat and tie. Nobody has any clue why. Did he not know? I mean, it's a day boarding school, so he must have seen the other kids. Anyway, he took a fair amount of in day 1. Day 2, wearing a coat and tie. Day 3, same thing. Then it escalated. For anyone who has ever been to a fancy prep school with coat and tie, what it actually means is tan, stone khakis, cornflower blue button down, and blue blazer with penny loafers and a school tie. Then take the outfit and ball it up for a few weeks and put it on. I mean, everyone looks awful. Anyway, the escalation was three-piece suits, then three-piece suits with bowler hats and pocket watches. Then on a random Friday, he is wearing a tux. Armani, if I remember. Anyway, this went on for 4 years. I think he's a doctor now. Story 18 Odd kid in general. Quiet, didn't speak to hardly anybody ever. Carried a huge duffel bag at all times. When he sat it down on the floor by his desk, he kept a foot on it always. Rumors about what he had in that bag circulated, but nothing ever came of it. Once somebody tried to get his bag and he flipped out, screaming at the kid and smacking his desk. His voice went real deep, like growling instead of yelling. The kid was purple in the face when he finally calmed down. Seeing this, you knew it was a different level of anger. Definitely not kids been teased and had enough anger. Something was wrong. Anyway, we graduated. Forgot all about him until one day I read the paper. He had murdered his father and stepmother. During the attack, his dad got a gun and managed to shoot the kid, him, and then the dad died from his injuries. 3 total deaths. Kids spent time in mental hospitals off and on. Made me think back to that flip out and remember how I knew something was off, even then. Story 19. Had ringworm for a really long time. Lived with older grandparents who didn't really understand how to treat it. We were friendly before that, but the teachers had us all sit further from him and avoid touching him. BC, they didn't want it to spread like crazy, and that just turned him into an outcast, and we started to grow apart. I think one of the teachers finally had to make a house visit, and eventually the ringworm cleared up, but by then the damage was done, and worse rumors spread. I still think about him often. Last I heard, he wrote a children's book about uplifting kids who are different. I hope he's doing well. Story 20. I had a kid at my high school that came to school every single day dressed as Link from Legend of Zelda, sword and everything. Everyone knew him. However, for some reason, he got along great with everyone. In the hallways, I always saw people giving him high fives, saying hello, all sorts of stuff. Against all odds, he seemed insanely popular with every person in the school. Story 21. I was a tomboy in a Catholic school, pre-K through 8th grade. So wanting to play sports, wanting to wear pants, girls had to wear skirts and I hated them. Liking boy things like TMNT, not liking girl things like makeup and jewelry. Wearing my dad's folding aviator glasses that were giant on my tiny face. Not watching the generally popular shows at the time, but liking cartoons and eventually anime. Getting 2 lead roles in my school plays that were both male roles. Being content to be alone. And getting into fistfights with boys who bullied me. My mom and dad raised me to be self-confident and stick to my guns. So I was never trying to be weird. I was just enjoying what I liked and didn't pay attention to if it was what I was supposed to be into. Funny enough, that made my life hell through middle and grade school is what earned me my real friends in high school, college, and my general adult life. Just had to survive the first 13 years of misery. Story 22. There was a kid at my school used to carry around a pillow to sit on in class, like a full-size bed pillow, and it was filthy as well. He must have slept on it at night as well as I had that yellowy orange color to it. Almost looked like a massive pastry. He left it in an English class and were the next class to be in. He came in about 10 minutes into the lesson, burst through the door without knocking, and was frantically searching for this pillow. Walking around, throwing people's bags around, saying over and over, "Where's my pillow?" like a scatty mom that's lost her fags. He found it and dragged it out from wherever someone had hidden it and cuddled it like teddy bear, while what looked like hyperventilating, the heaviest breathing. Poor kid. Thing is, apart from the pillow thing, he was a completely normal kid. Poor guy wasn't allowed to forget about that for a while. Story 23. All he did was have the first name Irwin, and then some kid in class decided his name sounded like earthworm. From that point forward, that's all we called him. He was perfectly normal prior to this, but then eventually, after a while, he began to act weirder and weirder until eventually he was taken away by police in junior high school after a fight with another kid. We never saw him again after that. I feel really bad for him every time I think about it. Story 24. Wore a nuclear cleanup suit to school every non-uniform day. Always got into fights with people, as he was just itching to launch into something. I always got on fine with him, but he was like a loaded spring ready to pounce at anyone else that so much as breathed wrong. He later moved to a certain UK area to be policeman, where the action is. Ended up in the news of the world, because of what he was getting up to at his police station after hours. Then he left the police, and for some years I would often see him on national news in a dark suit in the background when world leaders were visiting London. Story 25. Went to high school for 2 years in Portland, Oregon. Let me tell you, it's the wildest I ever seen. Every day was Halloween. Everyone got along for the most part, but there were 2 fights that ended real weird. The first fight was a football player decided to pick a fight with a tall, skinny emo kid. The football player hit him twice and not much happened. Then out of nowhere, this tall, quiet, emo, lanky kid, just one, hits this football player and knocks him out cold. Then this emo kid kneels down next to him and slowly wipes his hair out of his eyes and pulls a razor blade out from under the sweatband on his wrist and carves his initials in the football player's neck. The second situation was one of my friends joined the high school hockey team and for some reason thought it was a good idea to harass one of the other emo kids that day or night. Hot or cold, rain or shine, wore a trench coat to school every day. So my buddy Alex is standing 9 feet from this trench coat kid and tells him he is a weird guy. Alex has also been harassing him for a while now. Anyway, this trench coat kid stops and turns directly to face Alex, unzips his trench coat a good 12 inches and puts his hand down to his armpit area and pulls out a machete, like a zombie-killing machete. Needless to say, Alex never harassed that kid again. Story 26, she wore devil horns every single day for the whole 4 years and tried to make men as uncomfortable as possible. I never knew her real name, but she went by Boy Scout. I applaud her to this day. Also had a kid who wore chain link armor for picture day and realized we shared a computer when he made the background. His class photo, the computer background. Can't remember his nickname, but another legend in my eyes. Story 27. Looking back on everything, it was generally just having some sort of mental disability or trauma. Several of the weird kids were actually just kids with autism or something similar. They couldn't react to new situations correctly, for example. As a 5th grader, we switched seating arrangements every week, but I was asked to always stay in the same seat the whole year because for the special kid, having new seatmates was too upsetting. I didn't get why this was the case and just thought it was his preference. Around the 8th grade, I figured out it was a mental disability thing and felt really bad resenting him so much and protesting the seat arrangement sometimes. But as an adult, 1, no, that's totally normal behavior. The 9-year-old wants to sit with his friends and is getting left out. That sucks. And 2, I must have been generally a pretty nice, polite kid. Otherwise, they would have picked someone else to sit next to him. The only outlier I can think is the kid that brought a gun to school in high school. He was generally a nice kid, just giggity, and always wanted to be the one that took things too far, but people thought he was cool for being a rebel. The gun was a few steps too far, apparently. ETA. I'm realizing another possible explanation is that I was borderline special needs, at least in the eyes of the teacher. Well, I'm going with the polite explanation. Story 28. He would wear a tie to class like a Mormon would when going door to door. He basically made that his entire personality and would throw tantrums when he was told it was weird to wear a tie and dress shirt to school when he wasn't a part of anything that even requested it. And I don't mean baby tantrums. I mean full-blown slurs being used, threatening violence and murder, one time grabbing someone's hand and biting his finger so hard he had to go to the hospital. Somewhat unrelated to all of that, after he started college, he got arrested for diddling a 9-year-old, and he went on to blame the child for dressing like a whore. Story 29, me, outcast. Weird since I either didn't respond to bullying at all or went haywire and beat them to a pulp. Didn't have any interest in small talk and social stuff. Asperger's autism spectrum disorder might have played a role in that. Other person, always calm, friendly, fairly quiet, hadn't raised his voice or been aggressive towards anyone for the 8 years I'd known him. Someone teased him, took his cap, and didn't return it after he told them to do it once. When they didn't, he threw his table across the room onto the offender, grabbed his cap, and left the classroom. Story 30. I might not have been the weird kid, but I was absolutely a weird kid. I was a deaf kid at a regular public school in the Deep South. Emotionally stunted from neglect and abuse at home. It got better as the years went by, but I am still kind of fucked up about being the gross deaf girl. I remember even seeing other kids' parents pointing and making disgusted faces at me. I am mid-30s and finally processing the trauma that shaped me into that emotionally stunted kid. I spent my 20s and early 30s either working or drinking, oftentimes both LOL, bouncing from one relationship to another because the thought of being alone with my thoughts was just that terrifying. But yeah, processing. I am working through a long-term recovery program, 1 month 3.5, 6 months 3.1, 2 months 2.5, currently at 2.1 ICAC for both SUD and the mental health stuff. Currently 9.5 months sober. I have 2 therapists that I see weekly, and while I don't see the progress myself, they tell me I am doing great, and they are literally the authority on that kind of thing, LOL. Trauma dump. Whoa! Story 31. They were poor. At the time, they would smell, have really greasy hair, and basically was on the receiving end of the cheese touch in elementary middle school. When I talked with her more in freshman year, I guess her dad wouldn't let her and her siblings shower more than once every few months to save on water. She would only ever shower after gym at school, and even then, she was never really taught how to shower. Story 32. Weird kid in our school was super athletic and had insane throwing aim. Seriously, snow days were a nightmare with him launching snow bombs at your face. He was basically the go-to for athletic tournaments. He was also really awkward at times and seemed to go off the deep end when explaining things, interacting with people. He was never really bullied. In fact, people tried interacting with him, but he was just too weird. We had a 10-year reunion, and he came. Nobody recognized him. He was totally different from school and was still crazy athletic. He ended up joining the Army and became a paratrooper. Kind of makes sense considering he was quite intelligent and insanely athletic at the same time. Story 33. I was friends with a kid in high school that we nicknamed Rat Lord. He was part of the very small metal community in my high school and was a couple years behind me. We used to sit together at lunch and study hall and bullshit or listen to underground death metal. He used to tell all his jokes with this weird grin and either normally or on purpose used to always talk like Beavis, but like lower and felg me ear. We called him Rat Lord because he had a one-man death metal band called Rat Lord that he recorded in his bedroom with a 4-track tape recorder. He played his guitar through a bass amp with a busted speaker because it made it beefier, and his double kicks were a playing card taped to a desk fan. He was doing these utterly disgusting inhale vocals that you could barely hear, and this was in '97, before inhales were really a thing. He stopped going to school with us after a year or two, and I never really found out what happened to him after that. I tried to find him a few times over the years. He was super weird, but he was fun. Story 34 had a kid that claimed he was a wizard or warlock or some such. He was really into some Wiccan and pagan stuff, carried a little bag of runes, would draw rune symbols a lot, claimed to curse people that upset him. I had a gym class with him, and a 1-gallon Ziploc bag full of eaten chicken wings fell out of his gym bag. They weren't clean but had clearly been eaten at. Unsure how he got them or why he had them at school. Story 35. New kid in 10th grade. Around 2003, moved up from FL. Completely goth industrial look. It was an odd sight in a country town. He was a condescending ass, but I tried to make friends like I always did. We had agricultural class together, and one of his building projects was, upgrading as he'd say, putting screws into his boot soles. Another was adding heavy-ass chains to both his pants and the back part of the boots. I never understood how it wasn't uncomfortable but he did it for years. We graduated. He eventually became slightly less of an ass. A couple of years later, he got married and moved back to FL. Last I checked, he has kids, and I believe still married, maybe. Story 36. One in elementary would catch flies, put it in his mouth, and sit there until it crawled out his nose. Also elementary had a kid with a glass eye, and he would pop it out and use it like a marble. On in junior high would make a point to either sit straddled the legs of tables we were at or sit with one leg tucked up so his heel was against his crotch and hump the table legs or his foot. Constantly. He would just sit there going at it while doing his work or listening to the teacher. Like, bro, we can see you. Story 37. We had one kid that we all knew as the licker. We'd be in class, he'd start to tremble, then he'd just start licking his desktop. Or he'd stand at his locker, then start to lick the combination knob before he opened it. I know as an adult that he was suffering through some very real OCD and other issues, and that he was trembling because he was trying with all his might to not start licking something. But as a teenager in high school, he was just the seriously weird kid who we all knew as the licker. To this day, I don't think I ever actually learned his real name. Story 38. The son of the band teacher at my middle school would literally beat himself up during class if someone asked him to, talking full force punches to his own face, throwing himself on the floor. He would also bring his dad's dirty joke books to school and read them out loud while the teacher was talking. In hindsight, kid probably desperately needed some help, But I went to public school in the U.S. South where the school officials ignore that kind of like it's a team sport. Story 39, I was the weird kid all throughout school. Basically, I was special needs, but kids even through high school would choose to not learn about it. I graduated 2024. I had emotional regulation problems due to being autistic. I was diagnosed pervasive developmental disorder, which if you Google it now, it was renamed to autism spectrum disorder. But people bullied me for being slightly louder than them, for being bubbly and giggly and so happy. And yes, I'm being serious. I, at 19, still have poor emotional control. Because even in high school, when I transferred to where was supposed to be a special ed focused school, yeah, no, they didn't help me. I was scolded, "You should know better," or 18, like holy. Also had a teacher starting senior year talk snarky and rude about me for still being an emotional 18-year-old. She didn't bully me junior year, when I still had problems. She waited till I was 18 because she would say apt how, "I can be less filtered to you guys because they're adults." Like, no, seniors ain't adults either. Anyway, yeah, I'm still called weird kid, even after graduating because my poor best friend, who's also autistic, still gets bullied. And on the first day of school, I didn't have to be there due to graduating. Her classmates were all talking me with her sitting right near them. So, yeah, nobody liked me. Story 40, he brought a can of Coors Light in his lunch. This was 6th grade, not that it would be any better in high school. And tried to convince the teacher it was non-alcoholic because it said light on the can. A few years later in high school, he became the kid who wore a shirt and tie every day and acted like a teacher. He was interviewed on TV for being the only kid who went to school during a teacher strike. Story 41, there was a kid a couple of years younger than me that was picked on regularly by 2 boys in his class. He didn't have good hygiene, but it was because he was very poor. He was a good guy. He worked for my brother later as an adult, and my brother said he was a very good worker and very smart. My brother is very reserved with praise, so a statement like that from him is a very strong compliment. Anyway, he went home one day and cut about a 2-foot length of garden hose with the male fitting and coiled it up in his backpack. The next day, he barred the doors to the locker room for PE and beat both of the boys that had been picking on him into a corner with the garden hose. He got suspended for about a week, I think, but he didn't get picked on anymore. Story 42. He dumped out a gallon of bleach and filled it with juice to drink it at lunch to troll people. But he didn't actually clean the jug. He ended up projectile vomiting. They called an ambulance. He aspirated bleach into his lungs and got some weird chemical pneumonia thing and almost died. Then developed a flesh-eating bacteria from the hospital. Almost died again. Bro showed up at school months later and everyone was like, "Was it worth it?" Story 43, I was one of them. ADHD, giftedness, and being emotional as a dude, and big eyebrows got me bullied. I asked a lot of questions, never paid attention when I didn't need to study, and still got the highest grades. Became the class clown to try and become more liked and less bullied. Eventually started punching back. Still the weird one and a clown, no longer for the bad reasons. The other weird kid also had ADHD, but severe behavioral problems on top of it. Threw his onto the ceiling once to see if it would stick. It did. He wasn't bullied much, since he had a bit of an unpredictable violent temper sometimes. I got along well with the guy. Story 44, younger brother of a friend of mine, walked around the school and between at least 2 separate blocks with his knob out. He was adamant it was an accident, and he didn't know. We were never convinced it wasn't on purpose. Totally unrelated to the thread, but once during the summer holidays, my best mate and I went to see the brother, and we could hear raised voices and fighting. As we got near the house, my mate nearly got decapitated as the younger brother's Queen, the game IRC LP, got launched out of a window like a lethal frisbee. Story 45, I was that kid at one school. There was a period of time that I went to 5 different schools in less than 2 years due to my father constantly moving chasing women. Being the new kid in middle school sucks. At one of those schools, there for only 3 months or so, I had not made any friends. So I just sat at a corner picnic table during lunch, drinking an empty and dew and petting honeybees. Got called a few names and whatnot, but then off to a new school due to another move. Story 46. He was Mormon, drew awesome pictures of dragons, and also sang a song to a girl in front of the whole class. She was embarrassed as hell. Dude had more confidence than I've ever seen in my whole life. I genuinely like seeing his drawings of dragons and wyverns and other mythical critters. They were very good. He was also obsessed with LOTR and loved talking about the books. A lot of people made fun of him, but I liked talking to him. Even if he was weird, He wasn't afraid of being weird, and that's based. Story 47 graduated in '09 and did a great switch on personal perception, but after switching schools in 6th grade and seeing the George episode of Seinfeld, I began referring to myself as the Justin, kind of missing the point. Friends I ended up making in high school who were the grade above me realized that they were grading my papers and would laugh about it. Very, very small school. And sometimes the teachers would have students grade papers for the advanced math class as proofs. Story 48. The weird kid at my school used to smell a lot like feces every once in a while. We were pretty sure he would poop his pants, which was eventually confirmed for me when I saw the lining of his diaper one day during recess. And then he pooped once in a paper bag, and I'm pretty sure I saw him carrying it with him on the playground afterwards. He was actually a nice kid. I was in a difficult situation where I was cool with the cool kids, but also cool with the dorky kids, so I would never make fun of him. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I tried to cover for him a few times so the other kids wouldn't notice. I hope that guy's doing good for himself now. Story 49. Our one kid was honestly fairly normal, just a bit slow and had anger issues, so it was really easy to rile him up. One of the skater guys gave him so much that dude threatened to go home and get his shotgun and blow skater kid's head off. No expulsion BC, the teachers knew, and kind of allowed the bullying in that weird way. BC, they let the kids have a release valve. That dude had lost his temper and didn't really mean it. Not sure how it worked out that way for him, though. We had other kind of slow kids that we all loved. I saw dudes I'd call dumb jocks be so compassionate. Everybody gave our guy, though. It was a very odd school TBH. Like my best friend in HS was gay and was terrified of anyone finding out. When she finally told her crush, the crush was like, "Oh yeah, everybody knew. We were just waiting for you to figure it out." Pretty sure they hooked up a few times, LOL. It's so weird to think about how that world literally doesn't exist anymore. Graduated in 2006. Story 50, weird but nice kid. Difficult home environment, I think. Used to run away from school and be brought back since we were surrounded by basically nothingness in 2 small houses. One day he hid in a locker, and when the principal knocked to ask him to come out, responded, "No one in here but us squirrels." Then an aide tried to take him from the classroom, ended up lifting him to try to get him out, but then 2 hands shot back into the room and grabbed the door frame. He pulled his head back into the classroom while the aide kept pulling him out and goes, "I'll be back," in a sing-song voice. I was sorry when he didn't come back the next year. Story 51. One boy could barely read and write, and he would frequently stand on the desk, expose himself, and attempt to urinate on people. At the time, he was a weirdo, and nobody wanted to sit next to him. As an adult reflecting, I came to the heartbreaking realization that he was severely mentally ill, should have been in a specialist school, and the system completely failed him to keep him placed in a standard 1,000-student high school with no support. Story 52. There were 2, but they were awesome. One started a fake store where you could trade random items for fake money. Whatever you brought in, he would mull over it like it was a fine discovery. Unfortunately, it was shut down when people started using real money to buy the fake money, LOL. There was also a kid who, if you requested it, would write an absolutely insane story about your death based on your hobbies. The star soccer player, kicks the ball so hard his leg flies off, or the musician sings a note too high and shatters a massive chandelier right over their head. The 2 of them also started sending fake coupons and advertisements to the meanest girl in school. Nothing threatening, just made up stuff for their fake supermarket with ridiculous slogans. Very annoying for her, but harmless. Story 53. Bragging about taking a shower only once in 2 weeks and getting his girlfriend, she was 14, he was 15, pregnant, and just sitting in the classroom during the birth, even though his parents wanted to pick him up, and the school told him he could go. When asked why he didn't want to be there, he said it probably wouldn't be his last child. Story 54. There was a kid with an unfortunate name that you would give to an awkward nerd if you were writing a character. Think Wilbur Butts. He was an awkward kid with a prominent facial mole and pretty bad dandruff. That was enough to start off. Then, in 9th grade science when we were discussing mutations, he announced he was born with 6 fingers and showed off his 2 wide, almost wedge-shaped pinkies with scars down the sides of his hands where the extra fingers were removed. I remember the collective social horror as he publicly announced he was a mutant. It was a small school, and 14 YOs are at peak judginess. He voluntarily murdered any chances of not being seen as a weirdo. We grew up, and I don't think anyone was overtly cruel, but he was always just weird and awkward. My daughter's uncle is a science teacher now, and he actually uses a picture of my daughter when teaching mutations. Kids are disgusted by people having mutations, but then he pulls up her picture, thick, dark hair, with a natural blonde streak. People pay to have that done, but it is indeed a mutation.